So, what I want to talk about today is not meant to be construed as concrete fact, but more my interpretation of things that have happened to me in my life and of the things that I've discovered through research into what I think are possible explanations for the things that have happened to me. I think I'll make a separate video that talks about uh, the actual events that led me to do all this research and to start theorizing about all this. But I really want to start off talking about the theory um, in its own context. And at the heart of what I'm talking about, I guess, would be what some people call like your soul, or angel, or demon, or ghost, spirit. Uh, this is all sort of under the umbrella of things that I call non-physical consciousness. And there is a distinct difference between ghost versus soul, angel, demon, in that these are all very religious in origin, and ghost traditionally isn't. There's a big difference between like I live in a haunted house versus I felt the Holy Spirit in church today, or this demon is inhabiting somebody, or this angel saved me from a burning car. There is a very distinct difference in the origin of those concepts, but to me they're all sort of under the same umbrella of non-physical consciousness. So what is that? At its core, uh, one of the main methods of communication between your brain and your body is electricity carried through neurons. Your brain can also trigger the release of different hormones, of different chemicals, and transmit information that way. But without neurons, your brain will cease to function and cease to be able to carry all of these signals to different parts of your body. And very recently, actually, I've been reading articles about scientists creating artificial neurons, which is very, very exciting because not only does it give us a deeper understanding of the brain and how it works mechanically, but it offers a lot of promise for people who suffer from Alzheimer's or other degenerative neurological conditions, in that you could replace an organic neuron that has failed or deteriorated with an artificial one and patch that pathway up to a functioning level. But in the context of my theories here, I guess, if to simplify things, if my brain had 4 different areas, we won't go into all like the different areas of the brain because I'm not an expert on them. But if my brain had 4 areas, to make it nice and easy, and they each had 5 neurons, so I've got 20 neurons in my brain, and a scientist makes 20 neurons and arranges them in the same order and replicates the same pathways for chemicals and electrical charges and everything to be carried from that brain to a body. Will they have recreated me? And the answer is obviously no. Of course it's no, because this replicant brain doesn't have the same experiences, it doesn't have the same memories, it doesn't have any of my personality. There's none of myself in this physically recreated brain. And to go one step further, there are a million cases of people who have had varying degrees of traumatic brain injury, of brain death even, or of the excision and removal of parts of their brain, even people who have had an injury so severe that they had one hemisphere removed. And your brain is very, very good at compensating in the wake of things like that to keep functioning. And not only to keep functioning on the root bodily function sense, but also your personality is preserved still. You're still the same person. You may be more unsteady on your feet. You may have more trouble speaking or handling small objects, things like that. But your personality is still there. It then kind of just becomes a question of, do you still have the motor skills or the language skills to express it the way you used to? It's still there, but can you get it out? And you can go one step further on that and think about how there are several examples of what we would call self-awareness being demonstrated by the behavior of animals. Or even infants, people who don't have the physically developed brain that an adult has, still have those symptoms of the self, the same way these animals have been observed to. I read one study about a bird who asked what color it was. It had been taught many words and concepts, like color, obviously, uh, and it knew enough words of English, obviously, to ask the question, but it eventually took those pieces of information of, like, I exist, and I know colors exist. How do these things relate? So what color am I? And that is the essence of self-awareness. How do I relate to this external information, or how do I relate to the world around me? How am I in the context of my surroundings and of my life? And it's very much a question that like a child would ask, because not only is there not one answer, unless something is of an actual solid color, but it's indicative kind of those first stumbling steps into expressing yourself or of identifying yourself in relation to the world. And so the conclusion you can kind of draw from these first two things is that not only is the self non-physical, but that consciousness or awareness is not restricted only to humans, which is important because it very much negates the concept of the self being rooted in the soul in a religious sense, because at least in Christianity, or maybe you could even call it Judeo-Christian faiths, the soul only exists in people. Dogs don't have a soul, they don't go to heaven. But you have a soul if you're a person, and that to a lot of people is what they have given or attributed rather the source of the self to, is your personality, yourself, your identity. That is intrinsic to your soul. But if an animal can have self-awareness, that means that the soul is not required for that level of consciousness, and so it's not rooted in this religious concept of the soul, and it's not tied to the physicality of the brain. And so the next thing I want to talk about is sort of this matrix-like idea of the body as a producer and consumer of energy. And it's not like a battery like the Matrix. We actually don't produce very much electrical charge at all. We make terrible batteries. But the human body is very much a machine. You take in chemical energy in the form of food, and you use it, you transfer it into either thermal energy or electrical energy or kinetic energy, I guess, to move your muscles. Speaking in terms of the brain, a lot of it will end up as electrical energy. I guess some of it probably remains in chemical form to help with the production of all those hormones and stuff like that. But neurons like electricity. And since the self is not rooted in the physical part of the brain, it's got to be something that's not tangible. It has to be something non-physical, like that electrical energy. If destroying the physical doesn't destroy the self, but complete brain death or shutting down the entire brain does destroy the self, obviously, what you're really doing is shutting off all of that electrical current at once. And the electricity is, in my sort of philosophy, I guess, the carrier or the source of the self. That is why, I mean, there's no physical thing you can touch and say that you're holding a memory in your hand or an experience in your hand. These things don't leave so much a physical artifact as they do affect the way electricity is carried. And I do believe that, you know, everything you learn, everything that you experience and go through does make some kind of physical change in your brain. That's part of a brain developing from infant to adult, is all those little changes made by experiences and knowledge gained. But it's like changing the shape of a balloon because you put more air in it. The balloon is not the important part. It's the non-physical thing inside it. It's not that your brain has physically changed in a way that changes yourself. It's that it has grown or adapted to accommodate this change in yourself, which is a very important distinction. Because once again, you could destroy that part of the brain, that once housed this part of yourself, or that once allowed this particular kind of electricity to transfer from one part to the other, but you haven't destroyed the electricity. You've only destroyed the physical part that once housed the electricity. And again, your brain is excellent at rerouting things to compensate for that kind of injury and loss. And so now we have the brain almost as a battery, but not quite to the degree that the Matrix or something would paint. But the brain as the source of this non-physical electrical self-awareness. And so how do you go from that to ghost, or that to spirit, angel, demon, something like that? The last 20 years for certain, what with the propagation of ideas across the internet, we've seen really a lot of really interesting things coming from both philosophy and the sciences in terms of how our universe relates to the idea of a bigger picture. Not only are we alone in our universe, but is our universe alone amongst reality? And there are various other concepts. I'll put links in the description to some of these things. I'm not going to go hours and hours into all this stuff. But there are concepts like Brane Cosmology, string theory. There's a model of a 10-dimensional universe. Hawking's latest explanation of what may or may not occur in black holes in terms of the physical thing being transferred but information staying behind on the event horizon. There's what people call the many worlds interpretation. And to me, the easiest one to really explain in my philosophy is, I guess you could call it like a 10-dimensional structure. So if you think of our universe as a 4-dimensional universe, we have the 3 physical dimensions plus what a lot of people think of as time. And you can kind of think of it, I guess, as how big is a box that exists for 0 seconds? Or how long does a box exist if it has no physical being? Are kind of 2 ways to look at the same question of what is the 4th dimension. And a lot of people say the 4th dimension isn't actually time, but for the simplicity of the argument here today, that's the way we're going to look at it. And so you have a 4-dimensional universe like ours, and another 4-dimensional universe, and connecting them is a 2-dimensional plane. If it were 3-dimensional, it would almost require the 4th to be there as well, because how big is a box with no seconds in its lifespan? But if you have it only at a 2-dimensional plane connecting these, sort of like 2 shoeboxes and a piece of paper, you could pass something from universe to universe that didn't require a physical shape, that had no mass. Basically, you could pass energy from universe to universe. And this is, some people kind of explain the behavior of some subatomic particles this way, and that you can't both know the trajectory and the velocity that they're moving at, or that almost when you get down to that level, things seem to blink in and out of existence, or there are many ways of thinking about non-physical objects that we are already aware of. Tiny little packets of light, things that we know exist and have no mass, and the way that they behave and the way that we are able to perceive them to behave could be used as evidence that they are in fact moving between other universes and our own. And these things are so tiny. And tiny is an overstatement for how big these things are. That they're so infinitesimally small that their passage has no real effect that we are able to monitor, at least that we know of. I guess some people, not just some people, but it's theorized that gravitons being partially responsible for gravity, that's something that we can see the cause and effect of. But in a larger sense, we don't have the knowledge yet to really monitor their impact as they blink in and out of our universe. But if you had something that had a non-physical consciousness that was also able to cross this plane from one universe to the next, it could, through its interaction with our environment or with other people or animals, have an appreciable effect, at least in the localized sense, in our universe. And this is what I think of after all this research when I hear the word ghost or when I hear the word angel or demon. In that all those words are sort of gross oversimplifications of this concept that a thing, whether it had a physical being in another universe or not, maybe there's a universe out there where nothing is physical, and there are just these sort of clouds of energy and awareness floating around and interacting with things. Or some people, I guess, believe in astral projection, where there's an actual being sitting somewhere and projecting itself, its consciousness, through to another universe or another dimension, some people would call it. But this is what I think of when I hear those words, and the reason I say they're oversimplified is it's not that like you would call Jeffrey Dahmer a demon or Gandhi an angel. They're just a person. That's a word that lets us simplify their intention into the categories of good or evil. And it's not even that you would call like the specter of someone haunting a house good or evil. Although some call it a poltergeist. I guess would be like a noisy ghost with evil intention or malicious intent. But all of these, I think, are just oversimplifications of the idea that there is something either sending its consciousness or that energetic being itself has come from one universe into ours and is inflicting its will, whether it's for the betterment or the detriment of those people and animals around it. It's just, it exists outside that concept of good or evil. And again, it's a break from the religious because it isn't a soul. It isn't a religious idea of a soul. It's a non-physical being with a consciousness that has entered into our realm from somewhere else and is doing whatever it wants, whether that is appear to some guy as a lady in white on a staircase, or distract you enough to take your eyes off the road so you slam into the car in front of you, or it slows you down enough in your morning routine that you miss a terrible accident, and so you call it your guardian angel, or you say this was the hand of the devil that put these events in place, or it was just a ghost that stays somewhere. No matter what you call it, or what the event is that sparks your awareness of these things, I think they're out there, and that there is this at least pseudo-scientific approach to explaining them, in that they are that non-physical self-awareness that has crossed from one universe into ours. And I guess you could go further and say that maybe the concept of heaven and hell are just other universes, or that when people die, our awareness can sometimes stick around also, and maybe that's where the idea of a ghost comes from, is that a person just gets stuck. I mean, you or I, at this moment right now, I would have no idea how to cross my soul into some other universe, or my awareness into some other universe. Maybe that matters when you die. Maybe it's supposed to sort of default one way, and, I mean, people get lost all the time on the physical world with Google Maps and streets that are clearly marked. Maybe it's really not that far-fetched to think of someone's awareness getting lost and just getting stuck. They just stay with what they knew. They stay in the same house. They die on the side of the same road over and over again because they just don't know what else to do. Maybe that's really as simple as things are. But regardless, this is my theory about how all this sort of relates, and yeah, I hope it sparks a discussion at least.